The empire's new clothes, Turkey's calculations, Spain's defiance, and the Age of Lawless Power. The moral architecture of the post-war order was supposed to be durable. For 80 years it rested on a set of shared assumptions. Alliances mattered, law constrained power, and even empires felt compelled to justify their wars in the language of principle. Those assumptions are dissolving in real time, as American and Israeli bombs fall across Iran, destroying infrastructure, killing civilians, and plunging parts of the country into digital darkness. The United States finds itself threatening trade war against Spain for refusing to cooperate, negotiating awkwardly with Turkey over sanctions, and leaving thousands of its own citizens scrambling for exits across the Gulf. The spectacle would be absurd if the consequences were not so deadly. What we are witnessing is not merely another Middle Eastern crisis, it is something deeper, the unraveling of the rules that once governed power itself. Ankara's balancing act Turkey has perfected the art of geopolitical contradiction. On the one hand, Ankara has been among the loudest international critics of Israel's military campaign in Gaza. Turkish leaders condemned the devastation of the enclave, imposed sweeping trade restrictions on Israel, and framed their actions as a moral stand against what they describe as a humanitarian catastrophe. Yet the same government is simultaneously negotiating with Washington to lift sanctions imposed after Turkey purchased Russia's S-400 missile system, a deal that angered NATO and led to Ankara's removal from the American F-35 fighter jet program. Turkey wants back in, and it wants back soon. Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan recently confirmed that negotiations with Washington are underway to remove the sanctions and restore Turkey's access to advanced Western military technology. But here the plot twists again. Israel, the very state Ankara condemns over Gaza, is reportedly lobbying Washington to keep the sanctions in place. This is the modern diplomatic stage: condemnation in public, negotiation in private, and strategic rivalry unfolding beneath both. The contradiction is striking but hardly unique. In a world where alliances are fluid and principles negotiable, moral outrage often coexists comfortably with arms procurement. Gaza, the war that reordered the conversation. Hovering over all of this is Gaza, the war that has reshaped global politics. The conflict began with the brutal attack launched from the Gaza Strip by Hamas militants against Israeli civilians. Hundreds were killed in towns and communities across southern Israel, and many others were taken hostage in an assault that shocked the region and triggered Israel's declaration of war. Israel's response has been relentless. Entire neighborhoods across Gaza have been reduced to rubble as Israeli forces pursue Hamas fighters embedded in the dense urban environment of the enclave. Hospitals, schools, and residential blocks have repeatedly appeared in casualty reports, fueling international outrage and protests across capitals from Istanbul to Madrid. The human toll has been staggering. For Israel, the war is framed as a fight for survival against an armed movement that openly seeks its destruction. For critics around the world, the scale of destruction in Gaza has come to symbolize something darker: the willingness of powerful states to wage war with little regard for civilian life, when they believe history and power are on their side. The result has been a geopolitical rupture that extends far beyond Gaza's borders. Turkey's trade restrictions, Spain's diplomatic rebellion, protests across Europe, and rising tensions within NATO are all ripples from the same explosion. Gaza has become not just a battlefield, but a moral fault line running through the international order itself. Stranded in the Gulf, while governments maneuver, ordinary people are left navigating the fallout. Across the Gulf, thousands of American citizens have found themselves stranded as airspace closures and regional instability disrupt travel. Flights vanish overnight. Prices surge. Embassies offer little clarity. The official advice from Washington has been stark: leave by commercial means if possible. For many, that means improvisation. Some have hired drivers to cross borders into neighboring countries. Others remain stuck in airport terminals watching departure boards flicker between delay and cancellation. The contrast is striking. Military aircraft crisscross the region carrying weapons and personnel. Yet the civilians caught in the middle of the crisis often find themselves navigating the chaos alone. Empires, history reminds us, are rarely efficient at protecting ordinary people. Spain says no against this backdrop. Spain has done something unusual. It refused. When Washington requested the use of Spanish bases for operations connected to the widening conflict with Iran, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez declined. 3 simple words captured the decision: no to war. The response from Washington was immediate. Threats of trade retaliation followed, with warnings that economic ties between the two countries could be curtailed. Yet the reaction inside Europe was equally swift. European leaders rallied behind Spain, signaling that the dispute was not merely bilateral but continental. Brussels reminded Washington that transatlantic trade is deeply intertwined, and that Europe would defend its economic interests if necessary. What might once have been a quiet disagreement within the alliance suddenly looked like something larger, a crack in the foundation of the Western order itself. The Age of Lawless Power stepped back from the daily headlines, and a pattern begins to emerge. Across the world, political leadership is shifting away from institutional restraint towards something far more personal and improvisational. Rules that once governed diplomacy, consultation, consensus, legal justification are increasingly treated as inconveniences. Power is exercised directly, often impulsively, by leaders who see themselves less as custodians of institutions and more as singular actors reshaping history. In Washington, Moscow, and elsewhere, politics has begun to revolve around personalities rather than systems. This transformation has not gone unnoticed by those who read history through the lens of Scripture. The Book of Revelation describes 2 beasts rising to dominate the world's political order, powers that command allegiance through authority and spectacle. The Apostle Paul, writing in his 2nd letter to the Thessalonians, speaks of the lawless one, a figure whose defining characteristic is not merely wickedness but the rejection of law itself. For decades, Western governments insisted that their authority rested precisely on the opposite principle: the rule of law. War required justification, alliances required consultation. Leaders presented themselves not as emperors, but as servants of constitutional systems. That restraint now appears to be fading. What was once concealed beneath legal language and diplomatic ritual is increasingly displayed openly, the raw assertion of personal power. In this environment, international law becomes optional, alliances transactional, and truth negotiable. The stage begins to resemble something older than modern democracy, something closer to imperial rule. The Imperial Temptation. The theological tradition has long warned of a final political temptation: the emergence of leaders who seek authority without accountability, power without humility, and legitimacy without divine sanction. In Christian thought, this is the essence of the Antichrist, not merely opposition to Christ, but imitation of Christ. A ruler who attempts to occupy the position of ultimate authority, demanding allegiance while rejecting the moral order that grants authority its legitimacy. Christ ruled through sacrifice. The counterfeit ruler rules through spectacle and force. One gathers followers through truth, the other commands loyalty through power. When institutions weaken and leaders begin acting as solitary arbiters of global destiny, the resemblance becomes difficult to ignore. A world at the edge. Today the Middle East trembles under the pressure of expanding conflict. Iran absorbs strikes. Gaza remains devastated. Alliances fracture. Trade becomes a weapon. Citizens flee airports and border crossings as governments debate strategy. In Ankara, Washington, Madrid, and Moscow, leaders make decisions that reshape the lives of millions. Yet the question that echoes beneath the noise is older than geopolitics. It is the question every empire eventually confronts: who truly holds authority? History suggests that when rulers begin behaving as if that authority belongs solely to them, the end of an era is usually close behind. And if the ancient texts are right, the final chapters of power may look less like orderly diplomacy and more like the chaotic spectacle unfolding before us now.